This article is being read by an automated voice. Executive Summary. All figures in this report are estimations, unless otherwise stated, made as of December 2024. Our figures in Latin America are referred to as a snapshot, as they provide a minimum estimate of the current number of natural refrigerant systems installed. This report provides a foundation for our understanding of natural refrigerants in Latin America, one Atmosphere intends to build upon in the coming years. As our Latin America chapter is intended to provide a broad overview, trends in the region were not covered. Estimates for self-contained hydrocarbon cases in Europe and North America are much higher than in 2023. This is the result of better and more complete data gathered from a combination of manufacturers, OEMs, and trusted industry sources. As the hydrocarbon case data gathered are historical, the increases should not be interpreted as year-over-year gains. The 2024 estimate is our new baseline for Europe and North America, and as such, we do not refer to estimates from previous years in this report. Our data collection process, as well as the model underpinning our analysis, is continually being refined. This year's iteration resulted in a more complete look at the global market for self-contained hydrocarbon cabinets, which were undercounted in previous reports. European market data. There were approximately 90,700 food retail stores in Europe that used transcritical CO2 systems. Of these, 76,200 used a centralized system, one or more racks, and 14,500 used condensing units. The number of stores with racks grew by 27% from 60,000 in December 2023, while the number with condensing units grew by 71% from 8,500. There were an estimated 9,400 industrial sites using this technology, and an increase of 48% from 3,300 in December 2023. In total, there were 95,600 transcritical CO2 sites in Europe, commercial and industrial, up 33% from 71,800 in 2023. The market penetration of transcritical CO2 systems in stores has increased this year to 30%. The percentage of all food retail stores in Europe estimated to feature transcritical CO2 installations, which includes condensing units. This is up from 22.9% in 2023 and 18.4% in 2022. Atmosphere estimates that 17 million self-contained hydrocarbon cabinets, mostly R290, have been installed in Europe. This is a significant increase from 2023 when we estimated there to be 3.2 million. The estimated 4,900 industrial sites using transcritical CO2 refrigeration accounted for 5.1% of the 95,600 transcritical CO2 sites in Europe. These 4,900 sites represent a growth of 48% from the 3,300 industrial sites using transcritical CO2 a year ago, which were 4.6% of the total 71,800 transcritical CO2 sites. Atmosphere estimates there were 3,600 industrial sites using low charge, below 1.3 kilograms per kilowatt, or 10.1 pounds per ton, of refrigeration. Ammonia systems in Europe, based on production numbers from leading OEMs. This represents a growth rate of 7% from 2023 when there were an estimated 3,360 such sites. There were 6,650 industrial sites with hydrocarbon-based chillers in Europe in December 2024. This represents a 33% increase from December 2023, when Atmosphere estimated that there were 5,000 industrial sites in Europe with hydrocarbon-based chillers. European trends. On March 11, 2024, the EU's revised F-gas regulation became law, and with it the clock began ticking on the use of F-gases in the bloc, with a complete ban set for 2050. The revised F-gas regulation places new limits on the GWP of refrigerants used in stationary refrigeration equipment and chillers. In addition, the regulation also established a link between F-gases and PFAS, stating, "Some fluorinated greenhouse gases subject to this regulation are per- and polyfluorinated substances, PFAS, or are proven to or suspected to degrade into PFAS." The European Chemicals Agency, ECHA, an EU body, is considering a universal restriction proposal to regulate PFAS as a category, including F-gases and TFA, under REACH, the EU's chemicals regulation. ECHA published the Universal PFAS Restriction Proposal, made jointly by the national authorities of Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, and Sweden, in February 2023. PFAS restrictions have been proposed that would include either a ban or a ban with derogations, time-limited exemptions, where alternatives are not yet available. North American market data. There were approximately 4,100 food retail stores in North America using transcritical CO2 systems, up more than 40% from 2,930 in 2023. Of these 4,100 food retail stores, 2,800 are in the US and 1,300 are in Canada. There were also 870 industrial sites using transcritical CO2 in North America for a total of 4,970 transcritical CO2 sites. The market penetration of transcritical CO2 systems in the estimated 70,562 North American supermarket and grocery stores is 5.8%, up from 4.1% a year ago. When considering convenience stores as well, the market penetration out of 232,390 retail food stores in North America is 1.8%, up from 1.27% in 2022. Atmosphere estimated 3.8 million self-contained hydrocarbon cases installed in U.S. food stores and 800,000 cases installed in Canadian food stores. In total, there are an estimated 4.6 million self-contained hydrocarbon cases installed in North American food stores. The estimated 870 industrial sites using transcritical CO2 in North America made up 17% of the total of 4,970 transcritical CO2 sites. The 870 industrial sites, which represents a 74% increase from the 498 North American sites in 2023, consists of 380 in the U.S., up from 208 in 2023 and 490 in Canada, up from 290 in 2023. Atmosphere estimates there were 1,230 industrial sites using low-charge ammonia systems in North America, 152 with packaged units and 1,078 with central systems. This is an increase of 17% from 2023. The 1,230 industrial sites comprise 842 sites, 717 with central and 125 with packaged systems, in the U.S. and 388, 361 central and 27 packaged, in Canada. North American trends. In May 2024, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, announced the finalization of its Significant New Alternatives Policy, SNAP, 26 rule, which aligns hydrocarbon charge limits with those outlined in U.L. 60355-2-89 for self-contained commercial cases and ice makers. UL 60355-2-89 covers safety requirements for commercial refrigeration appliances and ice makers with an incorporated or remote refrigerant unit or motor compressor. The second edition of UL's standard raised the hydrocarbon charge limit in closed cases to 300 grams and 500 grams in open cases. The prior limit for commercial cases was 150 grams. Maine enacted a sweeping PFAS regulation in 2021 and updated it in August 2024. The state has set an effective date of January 1, 2040, for the prohibition on sales of products containing intentionally added PFAS, including cooling, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and refrigeration equipment. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, DEC, amended the state's HFC regulations in December 2024. The amended regulation is DEC's 6 New York City Rules and Regulations. Part 494, Hydrofluorocarbon Standards and Reporting. It notably sets 20-year GWP limits as opposed to the commonly used 100-year GWP limits. The amended regulation applies to refrigeration systems used in commercial and industrial refrigeration. The 2025 Presidential Transition Project, known as Project 2025, recommends in its section on the EPA that a future Trump administration repeal Biden administration HFC regulations authorized by the American Innovation and Manufacturing (AIM) Act that are unnecessarily stringent and costly. Project 2025, an almost 900-page collection of conservative policy proposals, was organized by the Heritage Foundation, a Washington, D.C.-based think tank. It has been tied to President Donald Trump. Japanese market data. There were 12,250 stores, including 11,500 convenience stores and 750 supermarkets, using transcritical CO2 systems, mostly condensing units, up 46% from the 8,385 stores, 7,800 convenience/food 585 supermarkets reported in December 2023. With 470 industrial site installations, the total number of transcritical CO2 installations in Japan was 12,720 sites. The market penetration of transcritical CO2 in convenience stores is 20%, an increase from 14% in 2023. The market penetration of transcritical CO2 in supermarkets is 3.5%, up from 2.8% in 2023-2023. The market penetration of transcritical CO2 across all food retail stores in Japan is 16%, up from 10.9% in 2023. The estimated 470 industrial sites, mostly cold storage facilities, using transcritical CO2 systems, mostly condensing units, in Japan's industrial refrigeration sector, is an increase of 17% from the 400 reported in 2023. Japanese trends. In the summer of 2023, the Japanese Ministry of the Environment, MOE, announced it would continue its natural refrigerant equipment installation subsidy project through fiscal year 2027 with a budget of 7 billion yen, $48.7 million, 42.5 billion euros for fiscal year 2023. In addition, the MOE said it changed the program to make it more accessible to small and medium-sized enterprises (SME). The changes included making the application process easier and relaxing the equipment installation schedule. The maximum subsidy available was also raised from 1/3 of the construction cost to 1/2. The changes have had the desired effect, according to Teruo Kogu, director of the Office of Fluorocarbons Control Policy at the MOE. Kogu, speaking at the Atmosphere APAC Summit 2024, held in Tokyo in February, said the program saw a 10% increase in the number of SMEs receiving subsidies and a 10% increase in food retailer renovation projects. Kogu cited the increased maximum subsidy as the driving force behind the increases. Japan's use of natural refrigerants in its cold storage sector has steadily increased since the country ratified the Kigali Amendment in 2018, according to information shared with the UN Environment Program by Yutika Matsuzawa, the country's Vice Minister for Global Environmental Affairs. As of January 2024, 43% of the country's refrigerated warehouses use natural refrigerants. At the Atmosphere APAC Summit 2022, Japan's Association of Refrigerated Warehouses, JARW, shared data showing that 40% of the warehouses operated by its members, which represent around 90% of the total sector, used natural refrigerants. The share of the association's members using natural refrigerants increased to 51.4% in 2023 and has been rapidly growing every year since 2015. Australian and New Zealand market data. There were an estimated 330 supermarkets using transcritical CO2 systems in Australia. The market penetration of transcritical CO2 in the Australian supermarket sector is 6.6%. With 20 industrial site installations, the total number of transcritical CO2 installations in Australia was 350. There were an estimated 60 industrial sites using low-charge ammonia systems in Australia's industrial refrigeration sector. Survey respondents indicated that the majority of low-charge ammonia installations are for centralized systems. There were an estimated 240 supermarkets using transcritical CO2 systems in New Zealand. The market penetration of transcritical CO2 in the New Zealand supermarket sector is 22%. With an estimated 60 industrial sites, the total number of transcritical CO2 installations in New Zealand was 300. Australian and New Zealand trends. In June 2024, Australia's Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water, DCCEW, opened a public consultation period on policy options designed to reduce the use of HFCs in commercial refrigeration, particularly R404A, which has a 100-year GWP of 4,728 and a 20-year GWP of 7,208. The DCCEW noted that imports of R404A as a percentage of total HFC imports increased from 12.6% in 2016 to 16.3% in 2021, with condensing units and small racks helping drive demand. The policy proposals directly and indirectly target HER 404A-based commercial refrigeration equipment. The direct measures include a ban on new imports of R404A or a restriction that the refrigerant only be used to service existing equipment. Controls on recycled R404A were proposed too. The DCCEEW said it was considering exemptions for both the import ban and recycled refrigerant controls. The indirect measures consist of GWP limits for refrigerants in commercial refrigeration equipment, with the proposed limits varying by equipment type. New Zealand's Ministry for the Environment, MFE, released its first ever emissions reduction plan in 2022, with the goal of reducing its emissions from 290 metric tons of CO2e in 2022 to 2025 to 240 metric tons of CO2e in 2031 to 2035. The plan contains a chapter on fluorinated gases, which accounted for 2% of the country's gross greenhouse gas emissions in 2019. New Zealand ratified the Kigali Amendment in 2019. In the chapter, the MFE identified 4 key actions for reducing F-gas emissions. Build the capability to shift to alternative low-emissions refrigerants, which includes developing training and accreditation for handling alternative gases. Prohibit the import of pre-charged equipment. Investigate prohibiting F-gases with high GWP. Introduce a mandatory product stewardship scheme for refrigerants. Latin American market data. There were a minimum of 580 supermarkets and grocery stores using transcritical CO2 systems in Latin America. With at least 100 industrial site installations, the total number of transcritical CO2 installations was a minimum of 680. There were an estimated 125 supermarkets and grocery stores in Ecuador, 80 in Colombia, and 70 in Argentina using transcritical CO2 systems. Atmosphere estimated 8.5 million self-contained hydrocarbon cases installed in food stores in Latin America. Of those, there were an estimated 2.6 million self-contained hydrocarbon cases installed in Mexico and 5.9 million self-contained hydrocarbon cases installed in Central and South America combined. The 100 industrial sites using transcritical CO2 in Latin America represent 14% of the total 680 transcritical CO2 sites. Of the 100 industrial sites, 50 are in South America, 35 are in Mexico, and 15 are in Central America. Atmosphere estimates there were 60 industrial sites using low-charge ammonia systems in Latin America. Of the 60 industrial sites using low-charge ammonia, Mexico has an estimated 30 sites, South America 20, and Central America 10.